Avamid Beis, the last few words. The Gemara here is discussing the halacha of hoyel. What happens on Yontif? And you want to cook food after you ate your meal, and you're really cooking it for the weekday. Are you allowed or not? So there's a machlokes between Rabbi and Rav Chisda. So you're not allowed. Midrabanan for sure there's an isser. But the question is, minat Torah, would you get malchus for such a thing? So Rav Chisda said, yes, you get malchus because you're not allowed to cook on Yontif. The only heter is if it's for food. But if you're cooking for your choyel, so then there's malchus. Rabbi says, no, there's a concept called hoyel, even though you ate already, but guests might show up. And therefore you're cooking for those guests, which is for the purpose of Yontif. And so that was the whole machlokes back and forth regarding this inyan of hoyel. And then Rav Chisda explained that what's about when it comes to Yontif that's following, that right after Yontif will be Shabbos. Are you allowed to cook on Yontif for the purpose of Shabbos? So Rav Chisda said, over there, when you're cooking from Yontif to Shabbos, minat Torah, there's no problem for a different reason. Because Yontif and Shabbos is considered to be like one Kedusha. You see in the Psukim there, that just like you're allowed to cook for Yontif itself, cooking on Yontif for Shabbos, Shabbos is a continuation of the same Kedusha. So minat Torah, there's no issue, even though there's no concept of hoyel, but because it's like one hemshech, one kedusha. So minat Torah, there's no issue to cook from Yontif to Shabbos. Midrabanan, there still is an isser, even then, so you shouldn't come to confuse to cook from Yontif to a weekday, but minat Torah, you can cook from Yontif to Shabbos. So the Gemara is going to ask a question now on that chiddush of Rav Chisda. Eisvei, we learned in the Braisa regarding the lechem apanim in the Beis HaMikdash. Lechem apanim nechal Letisha, sometimes the lechem apanim, usually actually, the lechem apanim is eaten on the 9th day from when it was baked. La Sara, sometimes on the 10th day, Ula Achadasar. And sometimes it's eaten on the 11th day from when it's baked. Lepaches v'lo yaser. Not less than the 9th day, but not more than the 11th day. Keitzad, how does this happen? Kedarkai, usually Letisha. It's eaten on the 9th day. So the reason is because when was the lechem apanim baked? On Erev Shabbos, on Friday. And when do you eat that lechem apanim? It's placed in the shulchan, in the Beis HaMikdash, and you don't eat it until the following Shabbos, which is the 9th day from when it's baked. So that's usual. Be'erev Shabbos, nefa be'erev Shabbos, nechal b'Shabbos l'tisha. So that's usually it was baked on the Erev Shabbos, and then it was eaten on the following Shabbos, which is the 9th day. How about chol Yom Tov liyas be'erev Shabbos? If Yom Tov fell out on Erev Shabbos, so you can't bake your lechem apanim on Friday, so then you have to bake it on Thursday. So nechal l'Shabbos la'asara. So you'll eat it in the next Shabbos, which is the 10th day from when it's baked. Shnei Yom Tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. If you have 2 days of Yom Tov, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah that falls out on Thursday and Friday, so then nechal l'Shabbos la'achadasa. It's going to be eaten on the following Shabbos. It will come out to be on the 11th day from when it was baked on the previous Wednesday, or the Wednesday from the week before. Fi she'ein deiche lo yisa Shabbos v'lo yisa Yom Tov. Baking the lechem apanim is not doiche, not Shabbos, and not Yontif. So you can't be doiche Rosh Hashanah or Yontif that falls out on Thursday or Friday. It mentions here Rosh Hashanah, of course, because the Shnei Yom Tovim Shel Golias doesn't apply in the Beis HaMikdash. So the only time we have 2 days Yontif is Rosh Hashanah. So now, but the question is, V'i Omrit, if we say like Rav Chisda, that Tzarchei Shabbos Nasim Bi Yontif, that Minat Torah, anything for Shabbos could be baked or cooked on Yontif. Why aren't we doichi Yontif and bake the lechem apanim on Yontif for the purpose of Shabbos? It should still be baked on Friday for the purpose of the Shabbos. Right? You're going to say it's asam d'Rabbanan, but don't we have a rule that in the Beis HaMikdash there's no shvus, ein shvus b'mikdash? We learned about that by Riches at the end of Masechta Erevin. So the only issue is that there's a shvus, but minat Torah you're allowed to bake on Yontif for Shabbos. Amalei, so Rav Chisda answered, Shvus kroiva hitiru. Shvus rechaika lo hitiru. When there's an isser of a shvus, but you're baking it for the purpose of the upcoming Shabbos that's right here following this Yontif, that they allowed. Over here, if they're going to be baking on Friday, and there's a shvus, there's an isser to break on Friday for Shabbos, but you don't even need it for the upcoming Shabbos. You need it for the following Shabbos. That they weren't matter. Such a kind of a shvus, they weren't matter in the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore over here, even though it's only asam d'Rabbanan, this shvus, they were not matter, it's only for the next Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Ul Rab Shimon megamliel da'ama mishum Rab Shimon ben Azgan. Now in that Braisa, there's another opinion. Rab Shimon megamliel, what does he say? Doiches Yomtiv, that we do push off Yomtiv. When Yomtiv falls out on Erev Shabbos, you could bake the lechem apanim on Yomtiv itself for Shabbos. But if Yom Kippur falls out on Erev Shabbos, you don't push off Yom Kippur to be able to cook. Yom Kippur is a day that you can't eat b'chlal, so there's no cooking or baking anything on Yom Kippur, for there's no concept of Eichel Nefesh. So Yom Kippur you don't push off, but Yom Tov you do push off. So why does Rab Shimon ben Gamliel hold that you do push it off? Ma yikala meimar. So what are we going to say? Over here we see that Rab Shimon ben Gamliel holds that you do push it off even for the purpose of the following Shabbos, even though it's not for this Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Baha Pligi. So according to Rav Chisda, this is actually the Machlaikis. Mar Savar, the Tanakama holds, Shvus Kroiva Hitiru. This Isma de Rabbanon will only be pushed off if it's for the upcoming Shabbos. But Shvus Rechaika Lo Yitiru, if it's for the following Shabbos, they were not mad to this. Mar Savar, but Rav Shimon Gamliel holds, Shvus Rechaika Nami Hitiru. Even a Shvus for the next Shabbos is also something that they will matter. So therefore you are allowed to bake your lechem upon him Erev Shabbos, even if it falls out on Yontif. So that's the machlokes over here. But minatayre lekula alma, there would be no issa whatsoever, because this is Rav Chisda's opinion. There's no issa to cook or bake on Yontif for the purpose of the Shabbos that follows. I mentioned yesterday we don't paskin like Rav Chisda. We paskin like Rabbi that the only reason you're allowed to cook and bake on Yontif for Shabbos is because you're cooking earlier enough in the day that guests could arrive and use that food. But if you're cooking all the way at the end of the day, then it would be a issa minatayre. Masav Rav Mari asked a similar question on Rav Chisda from another thing in the Beis HaMikdash, the Shtei Alechem. So it says in the Braisa as follows: Shtei Alechem eina nechalois lepoches mishnayim. The Shtei Alechem is not eaten on the day that you bake it, so it's eaten on the next day, the second day from when you baked it. But v'lo yaisal shloisha. It's never eaten more than the third day after you baked it. Keitzad. What does this mean? Nefais erev yomtiv, if it's baked on erev yomtiv of Shavuos, nechalas li yomtiv, so it's eaten on Shavuos itself the next day. L'shtayim, on the second day from when you baked it. Chol yomtiv liyais achara Shabbos, if erev Shavuos is going to be on Shabbos, then nechalas li yomtiv l'shloisha. So then it's eaten on Yontif the third day. You can't bake it on Shabbos. So when do you bake it? You bake it on erev Shabbos, on Friday. So then you eat it on Yontif, on Shavuos, which is the third day afterwards. The fisha ene deiche loyes a Shabbos loyes a Yontif. Baking the lechem upon him for the carbon and Shavuos doesn't push off not Shabbos and not Yontif. Now the question is, v'i yomrit sarchei Shabbos nasen b'Yontif. If you're going to say like Rav Chisda says that everything of Shabbos could be prepared on Yontif, hashta the Shabbos b'Yontif shari. If you're telling me that the needs of Shabbos, the food for Shabbos, you're allowed to cook on the Yontif the day before, the Yontif b'Yontif mibaya. Needless to say that what you need for Yontif itself should be allowed to be baked and cooked on Yontif itself. So the question is, the Shtei Alechem, which is going to be eaten on the Yontif of Shavuos itself, why can't you bake the lechem upon him on Yontif itself? So why did they have to bake the lechem upon him on Erev Shavuos, or which would be one day before, or on Erev Shabbos, 2 days before? Why is it eaten always on the next day or the third day? It should be baked fresh on Yontif itself. Answers the Gemara, no, lechem upon him, you're not allowed to bake on Yontif itself. Why? Shani hasam, no makra, lachem v'loy legavoya. That the lechem upon him, which is being baked as a carbon, it's lachem, it's not lachem that is, it's being baked for the Eibishter, so therefore, over here, the heter of baking does not apply. When the Torah tells you that you're allowed to bake eichel nefesh on Yontif, what's the lashon of the pasuk? Ach asher ya'achel eichel nefesh hu levade yasa lachem. So only food that you're cooking and baking on Yontif lachem for yourself. But over here, since this is being made for the purpose of a carbon, even though the Kainim eat from it, but nevertheless, it's not something that's considered to be lachem. It's kachim. It's for the Eibishter's sake. So that over here, there's no heter to bake it on Yontif. Well, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, again over here, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel argues on this as well. Well, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel the Amar mishum Rab Shimon ben Azgan doiche es Yontif, that it is doiche Yontif. You could bake your lechem, the shtei lechem, on Yontif itself. Ma yikala meima. What is his opinion? How are you allowed to bake it on Yontif itself if the pasuk says only lechem, but not this shtei lechem, which is for the purpose of a carbon? Answers the Gemara, Savala ka'abishal. He holds the drasha of the pasuk lachem differently, like Abishal. The Omar Abishal says Lachem means lachem v'loy lenachrim. That you're allowed to bake on Yontif for yourself, but not for the purpose if you're inviting, if you have guests or people, goyim, that you're baking for them, you're not allowed to bake for them, even if they're going to be eating it on Yontif itself. But the drasha of lachem v'loy legavoya doesn't hold off. You're allowed to cook and bake on Yontif itself, even if it's for the purpose of a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore you can make the shtei alechem on Yontif itself. Shalach le Rav Chisda le Rabbe. Rav Chisda sent to Rabbe the following question. Biyad Rav Ache bar Rav Huna. And he brings in the following Mishnah. Mi amrinan hoyel. Do we say this concept of hoyel? So we go back again to this concept of hoyel that Rabbe said that on Yontif, if you're cooking and guests could show up, so you're not oivim and atayre because you're cooking for those guests, even though there's no guest here right now. So now, if so, we have a following Mishnah. But Tanan, the Mishnah says, Masechta Makis, Yesh Chodesh Telem Echad. There's a possibility for a person that plowed in a field with just one row of earth, v'chayavin alel, and you would be chayav for this, mishum shmeina lavin, 8 different lavin in this one instance. How was that? Hachayrish b'shor v'chamayr. So the charisha is done with an ox and a donkey together, so that's klayim. So he was over on the Isra of Klayim. V'hei mukdashim, and they are both hektish. So Rashi explains the shayr was a hektish as a carbon, so you're being over in another lav of loisabe b'pchor shercha, which is using a carbon in working with it. And then the chamer was also hektish. It was not hektish as a carbon. Chamer can't be brought as a carbon, but it was hektish that to the bedek abayis. To also belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, and what you're being over on a lav using the donkey as well, the lav of Me'ilah. You're not allowed to use anything that belongs to Hektish. So that's already, right there you have 2 lavin. 3 lavin that is. Shor v'chamayr is the kalayim, and then Mukdashim is another 3 lavin. And then the kalayim bekerem, that row that you were doing the charisha in, it's kalayim. There was a vineyard there, and the charisha that was being done, you were covering over seeds of plants together with the vineyard is klayim. So that's a 4th lav. Or shvius, and I was also shmita. So you're not allowed to work in shmita. So that's a 5th lav. The yontif, and this was being all done on yontif, and you're not allowed to do any charisha on yontif itself, which is the 6th lav. And then it was kayin v'nazir abeis hatuma, and this was a kayin that was doing this, and a nazir that was doing this. And where was this taking place? In a place which is also a beis hakvaris. So there's the lav of a kayin not becoming tamei, lenefesh leyatama, and there's the lav of the nazir al nefesh meis layavai. So that over here you have the 8 different lavin in one act of doing a charisha in this field. Okay, so now the Gemara will take out one detail here that's relevant for our case. Yeah.
One could be over on one lav.
Yeah, 2 separate lavin, kayin and nazir. So that's 7 and 8. Frag the Gemara.
It wouldn't be 7, it wouldn't be 8.
Why?
The kain. Oh, you're saying the kain is a nazir.
The kayin is a nazir.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Frag the Gemara. V'i amrinon hoyel. Now, if the concept of hoyel applies on Yontif, that the guest could come, and therefore the food could be used for the guest, so we could apply that concept of hoyel here in a similar way. Acharisha loy l'chayev. The charisha of Yontif, the Isser of Yontif, should not be a problem. Why not? Hoyel v'chazei lekisui dam tzipper. Because that earth that you're using, that you're plowing and you're softening, could be used now to cover the blood of a bird if you're going to shecht a bird. So there's a halach of kisei adam, and for the kisei adam, you have to use that earth to cover the blood of the bird, and you're allowed to use the earth to cover it on Yontif. So even though you don't have any birds in front of you right now, you're not doing any shchitas of any birds, and even if you do, maybe you have other earth available, but Rashi says, but maybe you'll have a lot of chickens to shecht, and you won't have enough earth available, and this will be the earth that you have to use for those chickens to cover the blood. So therefore there's a hoyel over here. Maybe there'll be chickens that you'll be shechting, and you'll have to use this earth. So why don't we say the concept of hoyel, that it's allowed? But the question on this Gemara is, what it does not explain is, why are you allowed to do kisi? Why are you allowed to do this kisi adam on Yontif? What would be the heter if you do have the birds and you do shech them and you don't, and the earth is hard, the earth that is hard, and you can't do kisi adam? Are you allowed to soften the earth to be able to do kisi adam on Yontif? Why? Why would you be allowed? So there's 2 shittas in Rishonim why that would be allowed. One shitta is because there's a klal esadei chalois esa, The mitzvah of Kisi Adam is an Esa, and the Isser of doing Malacha on Yantiv is a Lois Esa. So if you would have birds to shech, to cover the blood, that would be allowed, because of Esa Teicha Lois Esa. So therefore we should say Hayil, maybe you'll have those birds, and then it will be allowed to soften the earth, to cover the blood of the chickens. But it's not so pashut for a few reasons, this pshat of the Rishonim, and one basic reason why it's not so pashut is because the Isser of doing Malacha on Yantiv is not only a Lois Esa, it's also a mitzvah saseh. It's a Esa and a Lois Esa. So even though a Esa is Deicha Lois Esa, but a Esa is not Deicha, the Isser of doing Malacha on Yantiv, which is a Esa and a Lois Esa. And there's other questions on this pshat as well. So there's another pshat that many Rishonim say, that if you're doing charisha, you're softening the earth, and you're going to be using that earth for the Kisi Adam, the reason why it's allowed is because it's a Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. You're not doing the malacha of charisha for the purpose of what the work is usually intended for. When you do charisha, what is it? In order to soften the earth, for the purpose of the earth itself, to plant in the earth. Over here, you're softening, you're doing charisha not for the purpose of the earth itself, but to then take that earth and use it to cover the blood of the shechita. So that's called a malacha shein tzricha legufa. That's why it would be allowed. So, B'kitzur, the Gemara's question is that why are you saying that there's a malchus for the charisha on Yantif if you should say hayol, that maybe there'll be birds that will be shechted, and then that earth that you soften will be used for those birds. So then the charisha that you did will be a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. That's the shaila of the Gemara. Amar Rav Papa Bashmuel, says Rav Papa Bashmuel, what are we talking about over here? And here the Gemara gets very technical. First, the Gemara says we're talking about ba'avanim mikrozalois. The earth is like sharp rocks, meaning it's like hard pieces of earth, and they're really sharp and hard. It can't be used to cover the blood of the birds. So that's not, the hoil doesn't apply. Fragt the Gemara, but ru'uya is l'koitzshan. But even these hard pieces, can't you crush it? Can't it be used to crush it and then to use it for the Kisei Adam? So, fragt the Gemara, ru'uya is l'koitzshan, you're saying that it could still be used because you can crush it? Uktisha b'yamtiv mi shari? Are you allowed to crush it on Yantiv to be used for the birds? How could you crush them on Yantiv to use for Kisi Adam? So the Rishonim explain, why not? What's the issue? So if you learn, like the pshat that the Rishonim said, that I mentioned before, that the issue is Esa Deicha Lois Esa, so then it's very difficult to understand what the Gemara means to say here. When the Gemara asks the question of Ketisha b'Yamtiv mishari, what would be the problem of crushing pieces of earth that you should be able to use it for Kisi Adam? That's a malacha of Teichen. Right? But if we said that Esa Deicha Lois Esa, why is the Gemara saying Ketisha b'Yantiv mishari? Yeah, it is allowed. Esa Deicha Lois Esa would be allowed. So therefore, other Rishonim say, as I mentioned, that the pshat in the Gemara is that the only reason the charisha would be allowed is because it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. So therefore, now the Gemara is asking the question regarding Ketisha. When you take pieces of earth and you crush it, you crumble it in order to be able to use it for the blood, to cover the blood, that's a malacha tzricha legufa. You're crumbling it for the purpose of using the dirt itself to cover the birds, the blood of the birds. So that's a malacha tzricha legufa. So then how would that be allowed? How can you compare charisha to ketisha? Charisha is going to be a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. You're not planting in the earth, you're using this charisha to cover the birds. But ketisha is a malacha tzricha legufa. You're crumbling it in order to use that itself to cover the blood. So how would that be allowed? Says the Gemara, no, but it would still be allowed. Re'uya is lekotcha and kala'achayad. You could do the ketisha not in the usual manner. You do it with a shinu. You do it kala'achayad in an unusual way, and then you're not being over on the isam and atayra. There is no malacha here. So the charisha is a malacha shein tzricha legufa. The ketisha, when you crumble it afterwards, it's being done kala'achayad. So there's no malacha here. So where's the eighth malchus that you get over here for this? Says the Gemara B'tzunma. We're talking about a very rocky soil which cannot be crumbled. So it's not you cannot crumble it. You can't use it for covering the birds. So there is no hoil here that you might use it to cover the blood of the birds. Fragt the Gemara B'tzunma. If it's mamish rocky soil, barzriya, could you even plant there? We're talking about a case where a person is planting and there's klayim and is planting. It's not possible to plant in such a kind of a soil. Says the Gemara B'tzunma mulmayla. It's rocky soil on the top, but as he's doing the charisha, so he uncovers the softer soil that there is below, and over there, that's where he could plant. Says the Gemara, so then your answer doesn't make sense either. So yes, it's rocky soil on the top, but the soft soil on the bottom, so that soft soil at the bottom that he's uncovering could be used to cover the blood of a bird. So we're going back to our original question. You have a soil that's available that he's using for Kisei Adam. So let's apply the concept of Hayil, that maybe there'll be blood to be covered over here. So what's the answer? Answers the Gemara, Ela Omar Mar Barav Ashi. Mar Barav Ashi says, Betina. We're talking about mud. It's mud that can't be used to cover the blood of the birds. There's no Hayil because it can't be used for that. If you have mud, could it be used to plant in it? Answers the Gemara, so it's not mud, bimatunta. It's very moist earth. And this very moist earth will not cover the blood. In order to cover the blood, there has to be dry earth that will spread out to be able to cover the blood. It's moist earth, which will not be able to be used to cover the blood, but it still could be used to plant in, and therefore that's the case where the person is over on the Charisha and Yontif. There is no Hayil because it can't be used for Kisei Adam. Sagt die Gemara weiter. Eisvei Abaye. So Abaye asked the question. Another case where you see that you could be over many lavin in one act. Hamavashal gid anoshe b'cholov b'yontif. A person that's going to cook the gid anoshe in milk on yontif v'aichloi, and then he goes ahead and eats it. So it's 2 acts actually. So like a chamish, in this case you get malchus 5 times. Like mishom mavashal gid b'yontif. The first malchus is you're cooking on yontif. You could only cook on yontif something that you're allowed to eat. The gid anoshe which you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to cook on yontif. V'loike mishum oichel gid, and then he ate it as well, so he gets malchus for eating it. V'loike mishum mavashal basa b'chalav, he gets malchus for cooking basa b'chalav. Just the cooking of the basa b'chalav in itself is allowed. And also v'loike mishum oichel basa b'chalav, there's another lav for eating the basa b'chalav. And the 5th one is v'loike mishum havara. He also gets malchus for the havara, for making the fire for this cooking, which was not for the purpose of eichel nefesh. So now the question is, if you're going to say that there's a halacha of hayil, that guest might show up, and therefore the food that's being cooked could be used for them. So havara loy l'chayiv, making the fire for cooking this gid anoshe, which was not allowed, which is not for eating, but still you shouldn't be chayiv, hoyel the chazilei letzarchai, even without guests showing up. The fire that you made could be used, you might make use out of it for something else that you need. So you're allowed to make this fire, so you shouldn't get malchus for this.
Eichel nefesh, it's not eichel nefesh.
It is eichel nefesh. He might have a use out of it for eichel nefesh. He made the fire for the purpose of cooking a gid anoshe, which is not eichel nefesh. But he might use the same fire for something else. So how does he get malchus for making this fire because he was using it for a gid anoshe? If Rabbi says as a concept of hoyel that it could be used for something else, and then there's no iser. Amalei, so he answers him, apik havara, take out the iser of havara. That's not the 5th malchus here. V'ayil gid anoshe shel nevela. Besides it being a gid anoshe, it was also a gid anoshe of an animal that was not shechted properly. It was a nevela. That was the 5th malchus. Fragt the Gemara, that can't be. That's not the pshat on that brayse.
It is not shechted properly.
Because,
It's not checked properly.
or just either that. It's the same thing. So either it wasn't shechted properly or it just died. Yeah, same thing. Fragt the Gemara, v'atani Rab Chiya. But Rab Chiya says, loikin shtayim al achilosai. The pshat of this brayse was 2 of the malchus here was what he ate, because of what he ate, and v'shalish al bishulai. And 3 of the malchus is because of the cooking itself, even before he eats it. Right, so how do we learn the pshat on this brayse? He ate basa b'chalav and he ate gid anoshe. That was the 2, and then the other 3 was for the cooking itself. But if you're going to say if you're going to say that we take out havara, the making of the fire, and the 3rd one is the nevela, shalash al achilasim ibayil. It's actually 3 for eating, gid anoshe, basa b'chalav, and now nevela, and it's only 2 for the cooking. It's only the 2 of cooking basa b'chalav, and the fact that he's cooking on yontif, food that he's not allowed to cook, but the havara is taken out, so it's not shalash al bishulai. So shalash al chilasa mibayalei. Ella, so the Gemara answers differently, and there's going to be a long hemshech here in the Gemara, which goes down the Amud. We're going to start this in Yenover, and we'll continue tomorrow. But the Gemara starts. It says Ella apik havara. We take out havara va'ayel atzim muktzeh. and instead put in the isser of using wood that was not designated for a fire at all, and it was muktzeh, and he went and took that wood and used it for a fire. And that is the fifth lav. Taking wood that's not supposed to be used and using it for this fire, that's a lav. So the Gemara asks, muktzeh dairaisuhu? Is muktzeh ism min ha-Torah? Muktzeh is not an ism min ha-Torah. Amalei in? So Rabbi says, yes, it is a ism min ha-Torah. Where do you see the ism min ha-Torah of muktzeh? The chsiv, because the pasuk says, v'haya b'yom ha-shishi v'hechinu. On Friday, you have to prepare everything for Shabbos, and it has to be prepared in advance. Something that's not prepared, you're not allowed to use on Shabbos. V'hechinu sasha yaviu. So that's where the pasuk says that things that are not prepared before, that's what muktzeh really means. The translation of muktzeh means that it's separated, that you're not planning on using it. It hasn't been designated and prepared for this. So you're not allowed to use that on Shabbos, and the same thing on Yontif. But that's only a mitzvah saseh. It doesn't say a lav here. And the lav is from this that the pasuk says, Miloi sase kol melacha. So because it says Loi sase kol melacha, that includes also this isser of muktzeh, that if it's not prepared, and you go and you use it for a malacha on Shabbos, you're being over on the Isra of Muktzah, and it's a lav. So you get that will be the fifth malchus over here, not havara. Now the Gemara is going to bring a question on this, and it's going to refute this whole inyan, to say that Muktzah is min ha-Torah. So, and the Gemara will explain that Muktzah is not min ha-Torah. We'll see the hemshech of the Gemara. But even over here, at this point, when the Gemara is saying that Muktzah is min ha-Torah, so the Mefarshim explained, the Chassam Sofer, the Pnei Yeshua explained, the Gemara, there's a Beferish Gemara we learned in Shabbos that says that Muktzah is a time that was Neschadish, that is, in which time period? In the time of the Navi Nehemiah, that he saw that people are not keeping Shabbos properly, so therefore he was misaken the concept of Muktzah. And then after that, the Chachamim had various opinions of exactly how we implement the Isser of Muktzah, but it's definitely something that was Neschadish in a much later generation, not min ha-Torah. So what are we talking about over here? So the Gemara in Shabbos is talking about the Isser of Muktzah, of not tiltul, of not moving something which is muktzah. Over here we're talking about a different concept of muktzah. Taking a piece of wood and not just touching it and moving it, about using it for a fire, actually being mishtamish with it, the hishtamshus, using something which is muktzah. That's the svara that the Gemara is saying over here, that the isser of muktzah would be even min ha-Torah. In the later generation, the takana of muktzah is even just to be metaltal, even just to move it. That was a takana b'drabana. So that's the Gemara's svara right now. That's the fifth lav over here, not the lav of avara. Okay, the hemshech of the Gemara we'll see tomorrow, Mitzvah.